Someone has been watching you, not in the surface way, not the casual scroll past your posts, not the polite nod across the room. I mean watching, studying, tracking the arc of your life, with a kind of careful, sustained attention that you would not believe if you knew it was happening. And the reason you do not know is not because it is hidden from you out of cruelty. It is hidden from you because you are not ready yet for what that watching is about to produce. I want you to think about this past season, not the good parts, the long, quiet, invisible parts, the months where nothing dramatic happened, no miracle, no breakthrough, no visible movement, just the slow grind of a life being lived faithfully in a room where no one seemed to notice. The mornings you got up and chose to keep going when every impulse in you said there was no point. The decisions you made in private that no one applauded. The prayers you prayed seemed to bounce off the ceiling and return to you unanswered. The conversations you had with God felt less like dialogue and more like leaving a voicemail no one ever returned. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, maybe in the car, maybe at 2 in the morning, maybe in the bathroom mirror, a thought lodged itself inside you that you have not fully shaken since. Maybe no one is paying attention. Maybe the effort is not registering. Maybe I am doing all of this in a room with the lights off and the doors locked, and not a single soul, human or divine, is watching any of it. I want you to stay with that feeling for just a moment, because I am not going to rush past it, because what I have to tell you is not a dismissal of that feeling. It is not a cheerful correction or a quick verse to make it go away. What I have to tell you is far more specific and far more surprising than that. The watching that has been happening, the attention that has been fixed on your life in these invisible months, it has not been coming from the audience you thought you needed. It has not been coming from the people whose validation you have been quietly, desperately hoping to receive. It has been coming from somewhere else entirely. And the reason it matters, the reason this changes everything, is that whoever is watching you is not watching to judge. They are watching to move. There is a moment in the life of every person who has ever been faithful in obscurity when the thing that looked like being overlooked turns out to have been something else entirely. A preparation, a quiet installation of something so deep inside them that no public attention could have produced it. And when that moment comes, when the watching breaks into visible action, it does not look like the modest blessing they were hoping for. It looks like an interruption. It looks like a sudden shift in the atmosphere of their whole life. That shift is closer to you right now than you think. But before we get there, I need to ask you something. I need you to sit inside a question that you may not have given yourself permission to ask out loud. What if the very thing that has made you feel invisible is the same thing that has made you impossible to ignore? What if the season you have been calling your longest silence is actually the loudest thing happening in the unseen? Stay with me, because before this is over, you are going to understand your own story in a way you have never understood it before. Let me describe something to you. You are someone who has been faithful in a room where faithfulness costs something. I do not mean that in the abstract, inspirational sense. I mean it in the specific, lived, bodily sense. The sense where faithfulness meant showing up to something, a relationship, a calling, a decision, a standard, even when showing up produced no external reward and considerable internal cost. Think about the specific version of that for you. Maybe it was the friendship you kept pouring into long after the other person stopped pouring back. You kept texting, you kept showing up, you kept extending grace with nothing coming the other direction. And the worst part was not the exhaustion. The worst part was watching someone who gives nothing receive everything, while you, who give everything, walk away with a kind of quiet emptiness that you could not name to anyone, because naming it would have sounded like bitterness. So you carried it alone. Or maybe it was the season of professional faithfulness. You did the work. You did it well. You did it with integrity when cutting corners would have been so much easier and no one would have known. And then you watched someone else, someone who cut every corner you refused to cut, get the recognition, the advancement, the room at the table that you had earned with both hands, and they had borrowed on a smile. And you sat in your car one afternoon, and the thing you felt was not exactly anger. It was something quieter and more disorienting than anger. It was the feeling that the rules you had believed in, the unseen laws of cause and effect, of faithfulness producing fruit, might not actually be real. Or maybe it is even more personal than that. Maybe it is your prayer life. You prayed, and you prayed specifically, and you prayed with faith, and you prayed again. You brought the same request to God so many times that you stopped saying it out loud and started just sitting in front of it, because speaking the words again felt like repeating yourself to someone who was not listening. And the silence from heaven did not feel peaceful. It felt dense. It felt like a wall, not a wall that was keeping you out, worse than that. A wall that made you wonder whether there was anything on the other side at all. And here is what made it harder. You watched other people, people with less history, less sacrifice, and less skin in the game, receive what you had been waiting for, and you felt the thing you were most ashamed of feeling, not just grief, envy, the small, cold, corrosive kind of envy that you would never admit to another human being, that you barely admitted to yourself. And the shame of feeling it was almost worse than the feeling itself, because you are someone who knows better. You are someone who believes in something. You are someone who has staked your life on a set of convictions about how this all works. And in that moment, those convictions felt like furniture in a house that might be empty. This was not weakness. This was evidence. Evidence that you were in something real. Evidence that you were not sleepwalking through a comfortable faith. Evidence that you had put your whole self into something and were waiting, with your whole self, for an answer. I want you to hear this very clearly. The depth of your wound is the precise measurement of the depth of what you placed in front of God. You do not feel this way because nothing is happening. You feel this way because something enormous is at stake, and you know it. And the waiting has gone on long enough that your nervous system has started to misread the silence as abandonment. It is not abandonment. But before I tell you what it is, before I show you exactly what this season has been producing underneath the surface of your visible life, I need you to give yourself one thing that you have been withholding. Permission to have felt exactly what you felt. The grief was real. The envy was real. The night you wiped your face before walking back out into the room so no one would know, that was real. You do not need to reframe it before it is honored. You do not need to sanitize it before it is seen. Because here is the thing I know about the God who has been watching you in this season. He has not been grading your emotional responses. He has been present in every single one of them. If you have ever felt like your faithfulness was invisible, type "seen" in the comments right now. Because what you are about to hear is going to change the way you understand your own story. There is a detail in the story of Joseph that most people skip past because they are too eager to get to the ending. You know the broad outline, the dreamer, the coat, the brothers, the pit, the slavery, the prison, the palace. Most tellings move quickly. They want you encouraged. They want you at the throne room, and they want you at the reversal. But the text does something that we should not miss. In Genesis 39, immediately after Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt, after everything he loved and knew has been stripped from him, the text says simply, "The Lord was with Joseph, and he succeeded in everything he did." Note, the Lord comforted Joseph. Note, the Lord explained to Joseph why this had to happen. Note, the Lord gave Joseph a vision of what was coming to sustain him through the darkness. Just then, the Lord was with him, present, active, watching. And here is the detail that should arrest you. The text never gives us Joseph's internal breakdown. It never slows down to describe the night he must have wept into the dirt floor of Potiphar's house, wondering if the dreams God gave him as a boy were a cruel joke. It never records the moment he must have felt the rage, because he was human, and he must have felt the rage at the brothers who betrayed him, at the God who permitted it, at the gap between the dream and the reality. The text just keeps moving. Not because Joseph did not feel those things, but because they were not the point. The point was the unseen formation happening at the cellular level of his character. The point was that in the pit, Joseph became the person the palace required. What looked like exile was actually education. Here is what I want you to understand about your own invisible season. The people who have been ignoring you, the ones whose attention you have been waiting for, they were not the audience God intended for this chapter of your life. You were not placed in this obscure, quiet, costly season so that they would notice. You were placed here so that something would be built in you that cannot be built in public, something that requires the specific pressure of unseen faithfulness, something that the applause of human attention would have interrupted before it was finished. Think of it like this. You know what happens to a plant that is moved from the greenhouse to the open air too soon. It is not that the plant was weak. It is not that the plant was not growing. It is that the root system was not deep enough yet to survive the exposure. The greenhouse is not a punishment. The greenhouse is the condition required for the kind of growth that can withstand anything. Your season of invisibility has been a greenhouse, and now I want to give you something that C.S. Lewis wrote, not as a decorative addition to this argument, but as the hinge on which everything I am saying turns. In Mere Christianity, Lewis wrote this: imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. You thought you were being made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. Do you feel the weight of that? You thought this season was God making modest improvements to a modest life. You thought, if you thought anything at all, that the waiting, the pruning, and the obscurity were producing something small, something adequate. But Lewis is telling you, and I am telling you, that the scale of what God is building in you is not commensurate with your most generous estimate of what you deserve. It is commensurate with eternity. He has placed it inside you. He is not building what you asked for. He is building something that requires foundations you did not know you needed. And the watching, the sustained, careful, invisible attention that has been fixed on your life is the attention of an architect on a project. He has not abandoned, not the watching of a disappointed overseer, the watching of a builder who knows exactly what he is doing. What you called delay, heaven called consecration. But here is where I need to escalate this, because it is not just personal. What is being built in you during this season is not only for you. There are people, specific people, people whose names and faces you may already know, people you have not met yet, whose entire trajectory is going to be altered by the version of you that emerges from this season. The depth of what God has been forming in the quiet is directly proportional to the weight of what He intends to do through you in the open. This is not just about your comfort. This is not just about your breakthrough. What looks like one person's invisible faithfulness is actually the preparation of an instrument for something far larger than they can currently see. The silence you are in is not empty, it is full. Here is where I have to shift gears, because what I am about to say is not comfort, it is a diagnosis. And a diagnosis delivered with love is more useful than comfort that leaves the actual problem untouched. The reason the watching has not yet become visible movement in your life, the reason the preparation has not yet broken the surface, is not primarily external. It is not the people who overlooked you. It is not the circumstances that seem to be working against you. It is not even the silence from heaven that has tested your faith. Those are real, but they are not the root. The root is what you have agreed to. Let me explain what I mean. Over the course of a long season of invisibility, something happens to a person. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they begin to absorb the narrative that the silence implies. The logic feels inescapable. If I were truly seen, something would have happened by now. If what I am doing were truly significant, someone would have said so. If God were truly working on my behalf, the evidence would be visible. And from that logic, which feels like reason but is actually a lie wearing reason's clothes, a set of agreements forms. Agreement 1, I am less than I thought I was. Agreement 2, the promises that were spoken over my life were either conditional or mistaken. Agreement 3, the wisest thing I can do at this point is lower my expectations to match my reality, because hope that keeps being deferred becomes a wound, and I am tired of being wounded. Right now you are thinking, but that is not faith, that is just survival. That is just a person being realistic after enough disappointment. And I want to answer that precisely. It is survival. It is realistic in a very narrow sense, but it is also, hear me, the single most effective thing that could be done to abort what God is building. Not because God cannot overcome your lowered expectation. He can. But because the person who walks out of the greenhouse with a lowered expectation is not the person the palace was designed for. The person the palace was designed for is the one who held the original vision with both hands through every season that tried to pry it loose. Let me show you how this works from the inside, the way the enemy actually runs this strategy, because it is not dramatic, and that is exactly why it is effective. C.S. Lewis wrote in the Screwtape Letters that the safest road to failure is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. The enemy does not come for your faith in one catastrophic assault. He comes for it in increments. He lets you stay in the waiting long enough that the waiting starts to feel like the answer. He lets the silence go on long enough that you start to interpret the silence. He does not need to tell you that God has abandoned you. He just needs you to reach that conclusion yourself, quietly, over time, while you are still going to church and still praying and still doing all the external things that look like faith. That is the diagnosis. You have been in a battle you did not recognize as a battle because the most dangerous front was not external. It was the story you started telling yourself in the quiet. And there are 3 layers to this. The first is external opposition, the people who did not come through, the doors that did not open, the recognition that did not arrive. That is real, and it has done damage, but it is the most visible and therefore the least dangerous layer. The second is the world system, the metric by which you have been, consciously or not, measuring your own progress. The system that says, if nothing visible has changed, nothing real is happening. The system that rewards output and ignores formation. The system that cannot see what is being built underground and therefore concludes that nothing is being built at all. But the third, and I am going to name this directly because it needs to be named directly, is the old self. The version of you that learned, a long time before this season, that love is conditional, that safety requires performance, that hope is a liability, that the wisest thing you can do is want less, so that you can be hurt less. That version of you is not your enemy, but it has been running a survival strategy inside this season that is no longer appropriate. It was built for a version of your life that God is finished with. The new version of you, the version being B, that the greenhouse, the palace being raised on the foundations of your invisible faithfulness, that version does not need the old survival strategy. It needs something else entirely. And here is the thing about the person who has been watching you. They have not been watching the old version. They have been watching the new one, the one emerging, the one becoming. That is the version they're about to act on. If this is describing your exact situation, if you have been living in that agreement without even realizing it, type, "This is me" below. You are not alone in this, and you are not stuck here. So what does the person who understands all of this actually do? Not in the abstract, not in the inspirational sense, in the specific, behavioral, Tuesday morning sense. There are 3 moves. I am going to give them to you in order, and I am going to tell you exactly why each one works before I tell you what to do. Because Lewis was right that you have to be convinced of the why before the what will hold. The first move is this: revoke the agreement. Here is why this is the necessary first step. Every pattern of thought and behavior that has been keeping you small is downstream from an agreement, a statement about reality that you accepted, consciously or not, and have been building on ever since. You cannot simply decide to behave differently while that agreement is still running in the background. The agreement is the operating system. Until you change the operating system, every new behavior will eventually default back to the old one. What does revoking the agreement look like in real life? It looks like this. You sit with the specific sentence that has been playing on repeat in your head, the one that sounds like reason, and you say it out loud. You name it. You hold it up to the light, and then you say specifically, I do not consent to this narrative. This is not what I believe. This is not what was spoken over my life. And this is not what the evidence of my entire story, read correctly, actually supports. Do not underestimate this. The act of articulating an agreement out loud, specifically, and revoking it specifically, is not a symbolic gesture. It is the first act of the new identity. It is the palace beginning to replace the old self-survival strategy with something that can actually stand under the weight of what is coming. The second move is this: reread your own story. Here is why. You have been reading your story through the lens of what has not happened yet. That is the natural human lens, the gap between promise and reality. But there is another reading. There is the reading that starts from the end and looks back. And when you read your own story from that perspective, when you look at the moments you survived, the character that was formed in the seasons you called failures, and the depth that was drilled into you by the seasons you called silence, a pattern emerges that is not visible from inside the waiting. I want you to do something concrete this week. Write down 3 moments in the last 2 years where God showed up in a way you almost missed because you were looking for a different kind of arrival. Not the dramatic rescue, the quiet presence, the unexpected provision, the door that closed, and the better thing that came instead, even if the better thing has not fully arrived yet. Look for the pattern, because the person who is watching you has been leaving evidence, and you have been walking past it. The third move is this: expand your expectation back to its original size, not to the scaled-down version, not to the version you reduced it to after the 3rd disappointment, or the 5th or the 10th, the original version, the one you had before you learned to protect yourself by wanting less, the one that felt embarrassingly large and specific and detailed, the one that sounded, after enough silence, like naivety. That expectation was not naivety. That expectation was a revelation. And the reason you need to restore it to its original size is this: what God has been watching for, what the watcher has been waiting to see, is whether the person who received the original vision is still the person standing in front of it, whether the formation of the greenhouse produced someone whose capacity matches the promise. You have been in the formation. Now comes the declaration, not the timid, hedged, self-protective declaration of someone who has learned to manage disappointment. The full-throated, both-hands declaration of someone who looks at their own story, correctly read, and says, I see it, I see what has been happening, and I am ready for what comes next. The person who walked into this video was carrying the weight of invisibility like it was the final verdict on their life. The person who finishes it is about to carry something else entirely. If this message is speaking directly into your season, subscribe and write the word ready in the comments, because something is already shifting, and I want to be here when the door opens. Before I speak the declaration over you, I want to tell you about someone. She had been in her quiet season for 3 years. She had done everything right, not perfectly, but faithfully. She had kept the standard when no one was watching. She had kept praying when heaven felt like a sealed room. She had kept the original vision tucked inside her like a coal she refused to let go cold. And then, in the span of 6 weeks, 4 things happened in succession that should not have been possible given where she was standing. Not 1 door, 4. And the person who stepped through those doors was not the person who had been waiting at the beginning of the TC years. She was someone the 3 years had made, someone whose roots went down, near enough to hold the weight of what the open air was about to require of her. She told me later, I could not have handled this at the beginning. I needed all of it. I needed every single quiet day of it. That is who you are becoming. Now I want you to say this out loud. Read it slowly. Let every sentence land before you move to the next one. I am no longer defined by the seasons that could not see me. The silence was not the verdict. It was the formation. Every prayer I prayed in the quiet was heard. Every act of faithfulness in the invisible was registered. I am not behind. I am not overlooked. I am not the version of myself that learned to want less in order to hurt less. I am the version being built for what comes next. My roots go down farther than I know. My capacity is larger than my current evidence suggests. I am walking out of the greenhouse and into the open air, and I am ready for every ounce of what that means. Now picture your life 12 months from now. You are in a conversation you could not have imagined having from where you are standing today. The person across from you is someone whose trajectory your faithfulness unlocked. The room you are in would have been inaccessible to the version of you that existed before this season. And the thing that makes you most useful to that person in that room, in that conversation, is not your talent and not your resume and not your networking. It is the depth. The depth could only have been drilled by exactly the season you are in right now. You walk into that room not as someone who survived the waiting, but as someone the waiting made. And you will know, without anyone having to tell you, that the watching was real, and it was worth it, and it has produced exactly what it was meant to produce. Father, I am bringing this person to you right now, not with a generic blessing, but with specificity, with the knowledge of exactly what they have carried. I am asking you to step into the specific room they have been sitting in. The room where their prayers felt like they were going nowhere. The room where the evidence seemed to point toward abandonment. I am asking you to make the watching visible, not on their timeline, but in your timing, which is the only timing that produces the version of them the assignment requires. I am asking you to revoke every agreement they made with smallness, with reduced expectation, with the survival strategy that was built before they knew how loved they were. Replace it. Replace it with the full weight of the original vision. Replace it with the courage of someone who has read their own story correctly and seen the pattern. Replace it with the identity of the person you have been watching and building and preparing in the quiet. Let the greenhouse open. Let the roots hold. Let what was formed in the invisible produce fruit in the open that could only have come from exactly this. In the name of Jesus, and with the full confidence of someone who has seen you work in the silence before, I say now. Now is the time. Move in this person's life in a way they cannot miss and cannot explain. Amen. If this prayer landed for you, if something shifted while you were reading it, type Amen below. And if you know someone who needed this today, share this video with them right now. You might be the reason their season turns. You are not the sum of what has been withheld from you. You are not the product of someone who failed to see you. You are not the length of your waiting, or the depth of your silence, or the distance between the promise and where you are standing right now. You are the person who has been watched carefully, faithfully, and with full attention by the one who builds palaces out of people who thought they were only ever going to be cottages. You are not forgotten. You are not overlooked. You are not invisible. You are next.